So social media companies, if you don't know, YouTube being one of them, Facebook, Instagram, is all based on an algorithm that promotes novelty and stimuli to the brain. The way in which the algorithm moves doesn't always align with the fact that like there's a 6-year-old boy there. The algorithm's rewarded because more content's being watched and viewed. Um, and also what he chooses to click on is based on what his brain says, oh, that could be cool.
Welcome to the Company of Dads podcast. I'm your host, Paul Sullivan. We're focused on lead dads, working moms, and how small changes at home or work can have a big impact on their lives. Each episode promises to deliver actionable advice on some area of concern at home or at work. Short, direct, again, actionable. 5 questions, 5 answers. Today, our guest is Ed Tilton, president of the Begin Again Institute. Its tagline is, learn to heal from your past, stop harmful behaviors, and change your impact on the world. Ed is working to help men and fathers heal from childhood trauma that is holding them back, but also paying forward an unfortunate legacy. And that is one that can lead to intimacy disorders and addiction among the children they love the most. Married with a son and daughter and living in always sunny Denver, Colorado, Ed joins us today to talk specifics about the father-child relationships as they relate to screens and technologies. And what are we really talking about here? We're talking about conversation and communication between dads and their kids. Ed, welcome to the Company Dads podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Okay. I don't know if this is an R question or a how question, but, question one, I think we know the answer. If I were to ask you, are screens inhibiting authentic relationships between fathers and their children? I think we'd probably guess it, but, maybe turn it into like a how. I mean, how are screens inhibiting those authentic relationships between fathers and children? And how can we rectify that?
I think ultimately when we look at screens, the history of screens is important to tell the story. And the history of screens goes back to like my generation, where screens were kind of like, they were one-dimensional, right? They were kind of a buffer. You would put, in my household, like you would put on The Lion King if like mom had to make dinner.
Right.
And over time, what ended up happening is screens became interactive and screens started offering new ways to engage itself in almost a surrogate friendship. The problem is that there weren't the there weren't the precautions that were taken in the physical world that were offered in the digital world. And so information that was being given to kids or interactions that kids were having with screens wasn't always safe for their development or even their relationship with their parents. And so now what we have is kids that are being given screens too early, that are unmonitored, and ultimately that are just kind of an unknown entity for kids, but kids are viewing them as the expert or the place to go.
Yeah. You said too early. What's too early?
Too early, it's really based on a conversation with each family. But I would say there are things that every family should be doing when screens enter the household.
For example? Yeah.
Yeah. So one would be anything that has algorithms. You want to make sure that algorithms are in community spaces. So like for my kid, Clay, at 6 years old, like he's allowed to watch YouTube on the main TV in the house, but he's not allowed to watch it in his room, or he's not allowed to watch it on an iPad with headphones, right? I want to be able to hear as much as I don't always like hearing the the songs that accompany the YouTube, or listening to Ice Cream Tiger for like the 7th time. I can know how YouTube and the algorithm that's interacting with my kid aligns with like my family values.
Yeah. But take that thought one step further. And the reason you want him to use these in community spaces is because of why?
is because I want to know what he's hearing. I
Right.
want to
But
know.
what is your concern about the algorithm? If he's doing Ice Cream Tiger, tell parents who may not know, how does Ice Cream Tiger lead to something perhaps less appropriate or more pernicious?
So social media companies, if you don't know, YouTube being one of them, Facebook, Instagram, is all based on an algorithm that promotes novelty and stimuli to the brain. So it's going to continue to increase. It's going to increase engagement over time based on what you're searching. So Ice Cream Tiger becomes tigers. Tigers then becomes African safaris. African safaris becomes, war in Uganda, you
Mm,
know, and so the way in which the algorithm moves doesn't always align with the fact that like there's a 6-year-old boy there. The algorithm's rewarded because more content's being watched and viewed. Um, and also what he chooses to click on is based on what his brain says, oh, that could be cool.
right.
So
I think I'm an algorithmic failure. I mean, I watched like the 2025 Masters and then it served me up the 2024 Masters. Like, is that really as stimulating? I don't know. Maybe the algorithm doesn't like me.
it that seems like a good problem to have.
Be good problem to have. All right. Question two. Again, we're talking about conversation and communication and, authentic relationships. And I mean, I remember to this day, 40 years later, I remember the night my parents got divorced. I was 10. I was riding my bike too late with my dad. It was the last straw for my mom. She was worried in that pre cell phone world that something had happened to me. Obviously, that wasn't the cause of their divorce, kind of built up. But, now we have that Netflix series, Adolescence, where I'm sure you've seen it, but, two well
Yep.
meaning parents think they're supporting their son's interest by buying him a computer. But the boy ends up so deep into the manosphere and ultimately in prison for a serious crime. I don't want to spoil it here, but they think they're doing the right thing. They think there's, adding to his education. I was playing outside, too late, and that was what people worried about back then. But now we worry about what are they, really seeing on their tablet, on their computer, whatever. How have we come so far in such a relatively short time? And is there a way to pump the brakes?
Yeah. First of all, the adolescence, I watched it, and as a dad, it is straight to the heart. I
Mm,
mean, it is, and there's a lot of really good messages. And I think one of the messages is, you know, understanding like some of the things that are well intentioned and the unintended consequences that can come from that. And so part of that is just looking at hardware and software on your kids' devices. Um, so from a hardware perspective, there are things, or sorry, from a software perspective, there are things that that are image blockers, right? So one of the dangerous pieces that often comes about is when it comes to graphic images or accidental exposures, we call them, the average age is about 7 to 8.
mm,
And these are kids that are just typing up random things. They're looking up, things that they've heard. Um, and oftentimes they're things that they've heard on other screens. So now video games, when you're talking about the evolution, like how did we get here?
yeah.
um, having the ability to talk on video games, having the ability to interact across, we got here because technology offers us accessibility. The downside is accessibility isn't always good access. And so as parents, we want to make sure that our kids, when we give our kids screens, that we're not always giving the world to our kids. And so how we do that is through hardware and software technology, or limiting what the hardware and software can do. So from a software technology space, we at Begin Again Institute and as parents just in my household, we work with Covenant Eyes. And so Covenant Eyes works to just make sure that if there's a accidental keystroke or something that's going to be coming through, that it blocks it.
Mm,
Um, and so one of the gifts that we wanted to give your listeners is a special link that will allow anybody who is listening 1 month free access to Covenant Eyes if they want to try it out for themselves and see if it's a good fit for their family.
Tell us how it works. Explain how it works on a practical basis.
Yeah, so on a practical basis, it allows you as the parent to be able to see what your kids are searching up, and it also think of it like a filter. Any any graphic or harmful images just get stopped,
Right.
right? And so it alerts you as the parent to let you know, like, hey, this is what your kid is either looking at, either accidental or not. Um, and so that it allows for conversations to happen naturally as opposed to, the the father son talk or the birds and bees talk that a lot of people are really scared of.
Mhm.
The other piece that I would say that's important is the hardware side of things as well. So oftentimes, like when you have hardware that one of the fears of parents is always like, can a kid get around the software?
Yeah.
And the answer is sometimes, but they can't get around hardware, right? In this case, we're talking about phones, or I'm talking about phones.
Yeah.
And you can see over here, we've got our family calendar. Uh, Oftentimes parents are working to coordinate pickup time, drop off time, and the practicality of their kid having a phone is essential. But being able to make sure that their kids aren't having, secret apps on their phone, social media on their phone, the, dangerous aspects of the internet on their phone, being able to pair the hardware and the software together
Yeah.
uh, also works really well. And so the hardware that we use is a phone called the Wise Phone. It's produced by a company called Techless,
Okay.
and so Techless basically vets all the apps that are safe for kids, and all the ones that aren't safe for kids, they don't have the ability to download. And so the nice piece to that is if they can't download it, and you also have protection with Covenant Eyes on any internet basis, you're providing a great amount of protection for your kids. And then as a gift to the listeners, if you use promo code BAI at checkout, you get $45 off the cost of the phone.
Oh,
And Techless
thank you.
actually makes an in-kind donation to our foundation to pay for people's treatment that can't afford it. So you're doing two things at the same time. You're one, protecting your family, and two, paying it forward for someone who may be struggling with an intimacy disorder or past traumas. Find help, hope, and healing.
Thank you. Well, we'll make sure that gets in the show notes. But to follow on that, we're talking about software and hardware solutions. But at the end of the day, you could have the safest phone out there. You could block all of the harmful apps, but your child could still be absorbed in his or her screen. And the top of this, as we talked about, this is really about fathers having more conversations with their children. And every parent in America who has a child with some form of technology has at one point had some form of the conversation. What are you doing on that thing? Or
Yeah.
please get off of that now. And that's not a conversation starter. That is a
No.
conversation ender. So when you think, one thing we do in our house is we use a program called Custodio, spelled with a
Yeah.
Q, and it essentially sets time limits. And so we're giving our children some degree of choice. You have 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever you have, and when it's up, it's up. And then you can go through and you can block all kinds of. They don't have TikTok. They have limited access to certain things. And that we did that because I got tired, quite frankly,
Yeah.
of having the same conversation again and again. And so now it's like, look, this is life. Like at some point you'll have some amount of money and you'll have to figure out how to budget it and spend it. Now you have some amount of time to do this budget spend. But when you're talking to, some of the fathers that have come in to begin again for institute for treatment, or some of the fathers that you're just speaking to when you're out and about, how
Yeah.
do you help them have that conversation that is beyond the technical? Okay, you get the best software, the best hardware,
Right.
great. But now you have to talk about why, getting in trouble by riding your bike too late is actually a good thing. You want to be outside. How does that happen? How does that conversation start?
I mean, I think it's the earlier the better
Mhm.
is first and foremost. But the second thing is evaluating like your relationship to technology, right? It's always going to be a hard conversation when you say don't do this, but then I'm going to do this.
Right.
Um, one of the ways, because ultimately what you're doing is you're providing authentic connection that will win out over technology if you're following through,
Mhm.
right? That's my belief. That's what I hope for. Um, and so like just quick piece is like one of them is kids are really good observers, but they're poor interpreters. Like, so that's step one, right? So one of the things I always tell dads to do is when you take your kids out, be intentional about what your screen time looks like.
Mm.
And so like a
Like your
personal,
your own personal screen time, you as
yeah,
the father. Yeah, yeah.
right. You don't want to get them off the big screen to take your little screen with you and be on your little screen while they're out doing their thing.
Mhm.
One of the things that I remember vividly is we got my son into swim school, and the swim school was great, but like there was like this, there was a window you couldn't like talk to your kids, but you could see your kids, and he was scared, so I would always be like, "Hey, like I'm watching you, like you're okay,
Yeah.
right?" And so I ended up doing this thing which made all the difference for me as a dad, which is I never brought my phone out,
Mm.
right? Because he would come out of the water and he'd look up, and you'd see these
Right. And
micro.
if you were looking down on your phone at that moment when he looks up, you miss it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a micro bid for connection. And so you extrapolate that out over time. It's not just swim school, but it's parks, it's plays, it's any kind of thing that the kid's doing that's saying, hey, this is important to me. But if as a dad you're on your phone, then what you're saying is like, that's great, but this is more, whatever I'm doing is more important.
Yeah.
So one, just being intentional about the use. Two, if you haven't tried this, every dad should try this, and it's setting your screen to grayscale. If you Google like how to set your screen to grayscale, um, iPhones, Androids, it's super easy. But your screen is designed like casinos to keep you engaged,
Mm.
right? It's bright lights, it's vivid, and you actually have the ability to set the contrast so it's all gray. And you will see an immediate difference in your desire to be on your phone once you set it to grayscale. So one is look at how you're using it.
Yeah.
Two, try to try to change some settings so that it's not as enticing to use. And then three, in the event that you have to use your phone during a particular time, one is really make sure that that you have to do it, right? That it's not, you escaping or detaching from your relationship. But two is like narrate to your kid what you're doing,
Yeah.
right? So your kid understands, like my kid understands, like he understands two things. Video games and videos happen on dad's phone. And so if he sees me sending an email for work, all he sees me doing is this.
Right.
Is it's just looking like I'm playing a video game. So he wants to play the video game as opposed to me saying and sitting down with him and saying, "Hey, I have to send an email real quick. 30 seconds." I send the email, phone goes back away.
Mhm.
It really, that's what I mean when I say kids are really good observers, but they're poor interpreters.
That's just so good. And I don't want the listeners to feel like they get cheated because, quite honestly, Ed, that was my third question. And we kind of went into it because, we have at our house, we have screen free Sunday. And
Yeah,
so my wife and I, we both work, but we try to really abide by it on Sundays. And we're hard on our kids if they don't. But you know, parents check, sometimes have to check the phone out of necessity. But we do, fortunately, I guess you're making me feel better about myself, Ed. So this is an even better podcast than I thought. But we sort of do exactly what you said. And we kind of break that fourth wall. And like, I am right now, I am sorry. I have to step away. We don't have any phones at dinner. I'm sorry. I have to step away. This is a call that I've been waiting for. Or they'll also see us. Somebody will call and we'll put them into voicemail and we'll put it down. Like this is time.
right,
It shouldn't, as I often say, like if you're having a meeting with the most important person you want to meet that day, you don't then cut that meeting short because the second most important person
right,
calls you. You say, okay. But, very much like you said, when we have to do something, we break that fourth wall and we narrate it. And you're absolutely right. The observer part and the interpreter part, I put it in a different term because I think our kids are hypocrisy seeking missiles. Like if they see us say one
Yeah.
thing and do the other, they're like, whoa, you told me this. And even
Yeah.
with something like that, like at one point today, I dropped my youngest daughter didn't have school because of parent teacher conferences, and the older two
Yeah.
had to go. So she came with us, and the girl said, why are you taking her for a Starbucks drink afterwards? And I said, because I've decided to play favorites, and I'm going to be unfair today. And like, what are you talking about? I was like, because I took you 2 days ago, and she
Right.
wasn't here, and so now I'm taking her. And like, yeah,
Yeah.
because
No, I mean,
that's at the heart of that question. Like, are you playing favorites? Is this somehow not fair? And so we narrate it, and then we all laugh about it.
yeah, and I think it's as important to share what's going on in your world within reason with your kids. Like we want our kids to do well in school. We want them to be proud of the work that we're doing. I definitely told my kids about this podcast and how excited I was to be on it. And when they came out last night and I was working on, some of the questions, it's like Dad's really excited about
Mhm.
this. And then also making sure like when we have dinner, like you said, like there are no phones, and I 100% guarantee the kids are going to ask about the podcast.
Mhm.
And we get to be excited and say, "Hey, this is something we're celebrating."
Right.
Sometimes screens can be good as long as we're using them as tools, but when we're using them in replace of people or in replace of relationships, that's when it can be harmful because needs, especially for kids and how they view safety, can be tricky, right?
That's great. Question 4. We've already talked about, fathers protecting their children from harmful online exposure and gone through like some great responses. But how do you help fathers protect themselves from harmful online exposure?
Yeah. I mean, this is honestly one of the things that often happens with the guys that we treat. You know, they they can oftentimes it finds itself in isolation. It finds itself in routine or boredom,
Mm.
and lack of connection. So really, like step one is getting honest with yourself, right? Are these are these things that I'm doing things that I would be okay if somebody saw my browser history?
Right.
Are these, if
The
my
20, the
wife,
2024 Masters, I'm okay if they see me doing the 2024 Masters. I got that.
yeah. And for a lot of dads that struggle with this, it's a pet behavior that has like grown into a monster.
Mm,
This is something that really sadly started at a much younger age. And it started out of a desire to self-soothe, to feel connection, and sadly enough, often out of trauma. So whether it's, sexual abuse or other traumatic injuries related to vacancy and violation wounds, um, guys will seek out ways to make connection, even if it's false.
mm,
Similarly, guys will, and I'm saying guys because we're talking about dads, but humans will seek out, a connection to alcohol, or they'll seek out a connection to gambling, or they'll seek out a connection to shopping. We just happen to work in the space of intimacy disorders.
mm.
So ultimately, what's happened over the last really 20 years is people have started in the age of magazines in terms of graphic images and or adult images, and then it's morphed into dial-up internet, high-speed internet, virtual reality, AI. And so it's similar to saying, if we put it in a substance world, somebody started out, drinking 3-2 beer, and then they just kept drinking stronger and stronger and stronger things.
Right.
Um, and that's when we're talking about the dopamine that you're getting from some of these new websites. It's not even the same. It's not even the same images. And sadly enough, the way that the brain works is when images interact and move, the brain thinks that you're really there. That's why video games are so incredibly addictive, because it's a call, when I'm playing Call of Duty, I think I'm really, you
Mm,
know, I'm really engaged in these things.
yeah.
Similarly, when guys are viewing pornography, their brain is sending signals to their body saying, "Hey, we're really doing these things." And ultimately, what that ends up doing is it ends up creating a buffer between you and the real connections, um, because the dopamine and serotonin levels that you're getting out of those hits of interaction aren't the same as your connections with your kids or your wife. And so sadly enough, what those images and industry does is it gets the best of you and it leaves the rest of you for everybody else. And so that really is what we're trying to do in at Begin Again, is to really restore the intimacy that men can have with themselves, so they can then have that intimacy with their kids,
Mhm.
with their community, with their partners, and ultimately be able to move forward in honesty and integrity.
Yes. Question 5. How do healthy digital habits established today, directly influence our children's, future capacity for some of the things we've been talking about here: emotional intimacy, relationships, and overall, you know, emotional health? Like, we can all intuit it, but lay it out how, essentially it's like the digital foundation, how that foundation carries forward into the future, and how, I guess, the flip side of that, when that foundation is shaky, what problems it might cause down the road.
Yeah. You alluded to a little bit of it earlier, which is, you know, being able to have a healthy understanding or a healthy relationship with anything ultimately lends you to have a better a better outlook of your relationship with it later on in life. If I understand how to save money, then I'm going to be more financially stable in the future. If I have a good understanding of food, I'm going to have better physical health in the future. The digital screen is one that's interesting because we feel like that there's a connection to us with it differently than we view other pieces. But ultimately, like most of the relationships, almost all the relationships that we see that come in for treatment, they started at a very young age and it grew into something larger.
Mm.
So being able to help your children today actually allows for them to be in authentic relationships in the future and have better relationships for their kids. At Begin Again, we talk about legacy a lot, and what's the legacy that you want to leave, and how do you start living that legacy today? Um, because ultimately, I, I have a 6-year-old son. I've seen Wally like every other dad that has a 6-year-old son, and the people in Wally are only connected to screens. They've forgotten how to walk. They have zero bone density.
Yeah.
And, the while I believe that we'll always be able to get some version of technology in our life, choice is really what we're trying to give our kids, and being able to say, I choose to engage in this. But what you said, which is so important, is like, but I choose to invest in my family on Sundays, or I choose to, show value in human connection. What I can tell you 1000% is true is that your ability to demonstrate attunement and healthy attachment with your kids cannot be done on a screen.
Mhm.
When your kid falls and is crying, there's a thing called co-regulation where you're telling your kid through your eyes, through your physical touch, through being able to mirror that, like, you're okay, right? And that can't be done with technology. Equally as important is the ability to co-regulate is something that humans need. So as you go throughout your day or as you get older, when people have upsetting days or upsetting moments, what we're able to teach our kids when they're little is how to co-regulate so that they're emotionally in tune when they're adults, so that they're more equipped to be in relationships, to have better futures. The sad reality is we're just equipping them to be good humans.
Right.
But the competing piece to that is it's one-dimensional. It's a one-dimensional digital space that offers no connection, only instant gratification, and ultimately isolation.
So much good stuff here, Ed. Thank you for being our guest today on the Company of Dads podcast. Ed Tilton, president of the Begin Again Institute. Thoroughly enjoyed our chat today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Company of Dads podcast. I really appreciate you tuning in week after week. Just want to use this moment here to thank the people who make it possible. Number one, of course, Helder Mira, who is our podcast editor. We also have Skip Cherryholmes, who many of you know from the Lead Dad Diaries. He's taken over our social media. Terry Brennan is helping us with our audience development, and Emily Servin is there each and every day helping with the web development. I can't do any of this without an amazing board of advisors. So I just want to say thank you to all of you who help, and I want to say thank you to everyone who listens, and hopefully you'll tune in again next week. Thanks so much.